The result of our first book has been mainly negative. We have taken up a number of ways of regarding reality, and we have found that they are all vitiated by self-discrepancy. The reality can accept not one of these predicates, at least in the character in which so far they have come. We certainly ended with a reflection which promised something positive. Whatever is rejected as appearance is, for that very reason, no mere nonentity. It cannot bodily be shelved and merely gotten rid of, and, therefore, since it must fall somewhere, it must belong to reality. To take it as existing somehow and somewhere in the unreal would surely be quite meaningless, for reality must own and cannot be less than appearance. And that is the one positive result which, so far, we have reached. But as to the character which, otherwise, the real possesses, we at present know nothing, and a further knowledge is what we must aim at through the remainder of our search. Is there an absolute criterion? This question, to my mind, is answered by a second question. How, otherwise, should we be able to say anything at all about appearance? For through the last book, the reader will remember, we were, for the most part, criticizing. We were judging phenomena, and we were condemning them. And throughout, we proceeded as if the self-contradictory could not be real. But this was surely to have and to apply an absolute criterion. For consider, you can scarcely propose to be quite passive when presented with statements about reality. You can hardly take the position of admitting any and every nonsense to be truth absolute and entire, at least so far as you know. For if you think at all so as to discriminate between truth and falsehood, you will find that you cannot accept open self-contradiction. Hence, to think is to judge, and to judge is to criticize, and to criticize is to use a criterion of reality. And surely to doubt this would be mere blindness, or confused self-deception. But, if so, it is clear that, in rejecting the inconsistent as appearance, we are applying a positive knowledge of the ultimate nature of things. Ultimate reality is such that it does not contradict itself. Here is an absolute criterion. And it is proved absolute by the fact that, either in endeavoring to deny it, or even in attempting to doubt it, we tacitly assume its validity. One of these essays in delusion may be noticed briefly in passing. We may be told that our criterion has been developed by experience, and that therefore, at least it may not be absolute. But why anything should be weaker for having been developed is, in the first place, not obvious. And, in the second place, the whole doubt, when understood, destroys itself. For the alleged origin of our criterion is deliberated to us by knowledge which rests throughout on its application as an absolute test. And what can be more irrational than to try to prove that a principle is doubtful, when the proof, through every step, rests on its unconditional truth? Reality is one in this sense, that it has a positive nature, exclusive of discord, a nature which must hold throughout everything that is to be real. Its diversity can be diverse only so far as to not clash, and what seems otherwise, anywhere, cannot be real. And, from the other side, everything which appears must be real. Appearance must belong to reality, and it must, therefore, be concordant and other than it seems. The bewildering mass of phenomenal diversity must hence somehow be at unity and self-consistent. For it cannot be elsewhere than in reality, and reality excludes discord. Or again, we may put it so. The real is individual. It is one in the sense that its positive character embraces all differences in an inclusive harmony. And this knowledge, poor as it may be, is certainly more than bare negation or simple ignorance. So far as it goes, it gives us positive news about absolute reality. Let us try to carry this conclusion a step further on. We know that the real is one, but its oneness so far is ambiguous. Is it one system possessing diversity as an adjective? Or is its consistency, on the other hand, an attribute of independent realities? We have to ask, in short, if a plurality of reals is possible, and if these can merely coexist so as not to be discrepant. Such a plurality would mean a number of things not dependent on each other. On the one hand, they would possess somehow the phenomenal diversity, for that possession we have seen is essential. And, on the other hand, they would be free from external disturbance and from inner discrepancy. After the inquiries of our first book, the possibility of such reals hardly calls for discussion, for the internal states of each give rise to hopeless difficulties, and, in the second place, the plurality of reals cannot be reconciled with their independence. I will briefly resume the arguments which force us to this latter result. If the many are supposed to be without internal quality, each would forthwith become nothing, and we must therefore take each as being internally somewhat. And if they are to be plural, they must be a diversity somehow coexisting together. Any attempt, again, to take their togetherness as unessential seems to end in the unmeaning. We have no knowledge of a plural diversity, nor can we attach any sense to it, if we do not have it somehow as one. And if we abstract from this unity, we have also, therewith, abstracted from the plurality, and are left with mere being. Can we then have a plurality of independent reals, which merely coexist? No, for absolute independence and coexistence are incompatible. Absolute independence is an idea which consists merely in one-sided abstraction. It is made by an attempted division of the aspect of several existences from the aspect of relatedness. And these aspects, whether in fact or thought, are really indivisible. Our result, so far, is this. Everything phenomenal is somehow real, and the absolute must at least be as rich as the relative. And further, the absolute is not many. There are no independent reals. The universe is one, in this sense, that its differences exist harmoniously within one whole, beyond which there is nothing. Hence, the absolute is, so far, an individual and a system. But, if we stop here, it remains but formal and abstract. Can we then, the question is, say anything about the concrete nature of the system? Certainly, I think, this is possible. When we ask as to the matter which fills up this empty outline, we can reply in one word, that this matter is experience. And experience means something much the same as given and present fact. We perceive, on reflection, that to be real, or even barely to exist, must be to fall within sentience. Sentient experience, in short, is reality. And what is not this is not real. We may say, in other words, that there is no being or fact outside of that which is commonly called psychical existence. Feeling, thought, and volition, any groups under which we class psychical phenomena, are all the material of existence. And there is no other material, actual, or even possible. This result, in its general form, seems evident at once. And, however serious a step we now seem to have taken, there would be no advantage at this point in discussing it at length. For the test in the main lies ready to our hand, and the decision rests on the manner in which it is applied. I will state the case briefly, thus. Find any piece of existence. Take up anything that one could possibly call a fact, or could in any sense assert to have being. And then judge if it does not consist in sentient experience. Try to discover any sense in which you could still continue to speak of it when all perception and feeling have been removed. Or point out any fragment of its matter, any aspect of its being which is not derived from and is still not relative to this source. When the experiment is made strictly, I can myself conceive of nothing else than the experienced. Anything in no sense felt or perceived becomes to me quite unmeaning, and as I cannot try to think of it without realizing either that I am not thinking at all, or that I am thinking of it against my will as being experienced, I am driven to the conclusion that for me, experience is the same as reality. The fact that falls elsewhere seems, in my mind, to be a mere word and a failure, or else an attempt at self-contradiction. It is a vicious abstraction whose existence is meaningless nonsense, and is therefore not possible. This conclusion is open, of course, to grave objection, and must, in its consequences, give rise to serious difficulties. I will not attempt to anticipate the discussion of these, but before passing on, will try to obviate a dangerous mistake. For in asserting that the real is nothing but experience, I may be understood to endorse a common error. I may be taken, first, to divide the percipient subject from the universe, and then, resting on that subject, as on a thing actual by itself, I may be supposed to urge that it cannot transcend its own states. Such an argument would lead to impossible results, and would stand on a foundation of faulty abstraction. To set up the subject as real independently of the whole, and to make the whole into experience, in the sense of an adjective of that subject, seems to me indefensible. And when I contend that reality must be sentient, my conclusion almost consists in the denial of this fundamental error. For if, seeking for reality, we go to experience, what we certainly do not find is a subject or an object, or indeed any other thing whatsoever, standing separate on its own bottom. What we discover, rather, is a whole in which such distinctions can be made, but in which divisions do not exist. And this is the point on which I insist. And it is the very ground on which I stand when I urge that reality is sentient experience. I mean that to be real is to be indissolubly one thing with sentience. It is to be something which comes as a feature and aspect within the one whole of feeling. Something which, except as an integral element of such sentience, has no meaning at all. And what I repudiate is the separation of feeling from the felt, or of the desired from desire, or of what is thought from thinking, or the division, I might add, of anything from anything else. Nothing is ever so presented as real by itself, nor can be argued so to exist without demonstrable fallacy. And in the asserting that the reality is sentient experience, I rest throughout on this foundation. You cannot find fact unless in unity with sentience, and one cannot in the end be divided from the other, either actually or in idea. But to be utterly indivisible from feeling or perception, to be an integral element in the whole which is experienced, this surely is itself to be experience. Being and reality are, in brief, one thing with sentience. They can neither be opposed to, nor even in the end distinguished from it. I am well aware that this statement stands in need of explanation and defense. This will, I hope, be supplied by succeeding chapters, and I think it better for the present to attempt to go forward. Our conclusion, so far, will be this: that the absolute is one system, and that its contents are nothing but sentient experience. It will hence be a single and all-inclusive experience which embraces every partial diversity in concord, for it cannot be less than appearance, and hence no feeling or thought of any kind can fall outside its limits. And if it is more than any feeling or through which we know, it must still remain more of the same nature. It cannot pass into another region beyond what falls under the general head of sentience, for to assert that possibility would be in the end to use words without a meaning. We can entertain no such suggestion except as self-contradictory, and as therefore impossible.